At Arlington Cemetery, where silence speaks louder than words, a single soldier stands guard, unmoving, unbroken, even through storms and snow. But one afternoon, something unthinkable happens. A police officer confronts the guard and pulls the trigger of his taser. 1 minute later, the sound of approaching boots echoes through the marble paths. A 4-star general has arrived. And what happens next? Left everyone in stunned silence. Tell me your city in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy hearing about real people and real moments, don't forget to subscribe. Rain fell in a soft drizzle over Arlington National Cemetery, turning the marble walkways into mirrors of gray. The rhythmic scrape of a soldier's boot echoed beneath the stone archway. The tomb of the unknown soldier stood solemn, eternal. Every movement of the guard was deliberate, sacred. His name was Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole, a man molded by years of discipline, loss, and devotion. Each measured step was more than duty, it was a vow. His father, a Vietnam veteran buried not far from the tomb, used to tell him, "Respect is not given, Danny, it's guarded." Tourists watched silently, umbrellas trembling in the cold breeze. Cameras stayed low, whispers died in the air. This was not a place for noise. Then, from the corner of the plaza, came a sound that broke the reverence. A raised voice. A police officer, uniform soaked and eyes narrow, marched toward the ceremonial path. His badge gleamed, but his stance was aggressive. People instinctively stepped back, sensing something was wrong. "Sir, you need to move," the officer barked, gesturing toward Daniel. "You're obstructing an active security perimeter." Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. The guard's creed forbade breaking formation, no matter what happened around him. "Sir," the officer shouted again, his tone sharp, "this is your final warning." The tourists gasped. The hush deepened. Rain pattered harder on the soldier's pristine uniform. Yet Daniel remained still, rifle across his chest, eyes forward, expression unwavering. And then, in an instant that froze every witness, the officer fired his taser. Daniel's body jolted, muscles locking in agony. He staggered but didn't fall. His rifle slipped slightly, boots scraping marble. Yet his eyes stayed ahead. No sound escaped his lips. Someone screamed. Another began filming. The officer lowered his taser, muttering into his radio. "Suspect situation controlled." But the word suspect cut through the stunned crowd like a blade. Because everyone here knew Daniel Cole wasn't a suspect. He was the guard of the unknown. And then, as the echo of electricity still lingered in the wet air, a black car screeched to a halt at the cemetery gate. From it stepped a man in a dark coat, silver stars on his shoulders glinting faintly under the rain. A 4-star general. The black sedan's door opened with military precision. Out stepped General Marcus Langford, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. His expression was unreadable, stone carved from decades of war and command. The rain gathered on his cap brim, sliding down like cold tears, yet he didn't flinch. The cemetery security team froze. The officer who had fired the taser stiffened, his eyes darting between his holstered weapon and the general's slow, measured stride. The crowd parted as the general approached. No one spoke. Even the rain seemed quieter, as if the heavens held their breath. Daniel Cole still stood at his post, trembling slightly, his uniform damp and his hands barely steady, but his posture intact. The current of pain from the taser still pulsed in his limbs, but his oath was stronger than his body. He hadn't broken his watch, not even once. General Langford stopped just a few feet away. His boots clicked sharply on the marble. His voice, when he spoke, was low and controlled, but it carried the weight of 1,000 salutes. "Sergeant," he said, eyes on Daniel, "are you able to continue your post?" Daniel swallowed hard. His throat was dry. "Sir, yes sir," he replied, voice hoarse but firm. The general gave a single nod. Then, slowly, he turned to the police officer. "Officer," he said, his tone calm, yet colder than the rain. "What exactly did you think you were doing?" The officer hesitated. "Sir," he wasn't responding. "I issued lawful commands, and lawful commands." Langford interrupted. His voice didn't rise, but it cut deeper than a shout. "This man stands guard over those who gave everything. He's not supposed to respond to your commands. He responds to his oath to his country." "To us," the crowd murmured softly. A woman wiped a tear. The police officer's lips trembled. "General," he stammered, "I didn't know who he was." "That's exactly the problem," Langford said, stepping closer. "You didn't know, but ignorance is not a defense against disrespect." He took off his hat, placing it briefly against his chest as he turned toward Daniel again. The general's voice softened. "Son, you did what few men could. You held the line even when the world turned on you." Daniel's eyes glistened. He gave a rigid nod, trying to hold back emotion, but his jaw clenched. The general turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, let the record show on. This day, a tomb guard endured pain to keep a promise made to the fallen. That is honor." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was sacred. Then the general looked back at the officer one last time. "You'll answer for this," he said simply, before gesturing toward his aide. "Get his badge number. Full report to my office." The officer's face went pale. His hand trembled as he stepped back. Daniel Cole, still steady on his post, gave one last ceremonial step and turned with precision, his rifle gleaming in the rain, and the crowd began to applaud. Softly at first, then louder. It wasn't for the general. It wasn't for justice. It was for a soldier who never moved. Even when the world forgot why he stood. For several long seconds, no one moved. The sound of the rain filled the space between heartbeat and breath, steady, cleansing, almost holy. General Langford's eyes lingered on Daniel Cole. The young soldier's body was stiff, but his lips trembled just slightly. His training screamed for him to stay composed. Yet the pain had dug deep, not just physical pain, but the humiliation of being misunderstood, of having his sacred duty treated as a crime. The general motioned to his aide. "Get the medics," he said quietly. "He's hurt." But Daniel's head turned. Slowly, and with a trembling voice, he spoke. "Permission to remain on duty." "Sir." Langford paused. The words came out shaky, strained up, full of conviction. "You've done enough." "Sergeant," the general replied gently. "Sir." Daniel swallowed hard. "If I leave my post, the fallen stand alone." The general's expression softened. That single sentence struck through the years of command, through politics, through the bureaucracy of war. It reminded him why soldiers like Daniel existed, to protect honor when no one else would. The general nodded once. "Then you stand, son. You stand for all of them." The crowd went silent again, moved beyond words. Even the police officer, who had holstered his taser, looked down, ashamed, drenched, and wordless. Minutes later, as the mist thickened, the general took a step back. "Every person here," he said to the bystanders, "should remember this day. What happened here isn't about punishment, it's about perspective. Freedom and respect are not guarded by law, they're guarded by men like him." A veteran among the crowd, a frail man in his late 70s with a folded flag pin on his lapel, saluted Daniel. The soldier, though trembling, returned the gesture with crisp precision. The general turned to leave, but before he stepped into his car, he stopped and looked back one last time. "Sergeant Cole," he said, his voice strong against the wind, "the Army will not forget this. Neither will I." And then the sedan's door shut. The sound of the engine faded into the rain. Daniel stood alone again. His uniform soaked, his pulse still faintly echoing the sting of the taser butt. His stance was unbroken. His eyes faced forward, toward the unknown tomb, where countless souls lay without name or home. He whispered under his breath, barely audible, "For you, Dad." And for all of them, and as thunder rolled faintly in the distance, the storm began to clear. The clouds split, letting a thin shaft of light touch the marble of the tomb. It shimmered like hope reborn. By sunset, the cemetery had emptied. The wet marble gleamed under the fading orange sky. Daniel remained on duty, his uniform stiff, his body sore but his resolve unshaken. Every muscle ached from the taser, but he refused to yield. Unbeknownst to him, what happened that morning was already spreading past tourists. Phone video had been uploaded to social media. Police officer tasers tomb guard. "You won't believe what happens next." Within hours, millions had seen it. The clip showed everything: the officer's approach, the taser crack, Daniel's silent endurance, and the general's arrival. People watched, rewound, and watched again. Some cried, some saluted their screens, others simply whispered respect. The next morning, journalists flooded the cemetery gates. Veterans organizations issued statements. Civilians sent letters. Strangers dropped flowers at the tomb. Their notes simple yet powerful. For Daniel, for those who never broke. For honor. Inside the barracks, Daniel sat on the edge of his bunk, still in partial uniform. His hands shook as he scrolled through the headlines. He wasn't used to attention. The tomb guards were trained to disappear into their duty, ever speaking, never seeking praise. But now, the whole world seemed to know his name. A soft knock sounded on the door. It was Captain Elaine Porter, his commanding officer. "Cole," she said, stepping inside. "General Langford called this morning. He wants to see you at the Pentagon." Daniel blinked, unsure. "The Pentagon, ma'am." She nodded. He said, "It's not an order, it's an invitation." Daniel exhaled, running a hand over his tired face. "Ma'am, I was just doing my job." Porter smiled faintly. "That's exactly why he wants to see you." Outside, another group of visitors had gathered by the tomb, laying roses. Someone had tied a note to one of the bouquets. He stood when no one else did. And miles away, in an office lit by the early dawn, General Langford rewatched the video one more time. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just stared at the image of a young soldier refusing to move, electricity coursing through him, rain pouring down, and whispered, This is what it means to serve." He reached for his phone and dialed the Secretary of Defense. "Sir," he said quietly, "I have something you need to see." 2 days later, the rain had gone. The skies above Washington, D.C., were sharp and blue, sunlight reflecting off glass and steel. Yet, for Daniel Cole, every step toward the Pentagon felt heavier than the last. He wore his full ceremonial uniform, pressed, polished, perfect, not for show, but for what it meant. Every crease, every shine on his shoes was a reflection of the respect he carried within him. When he entered the vast building, eyes turned. Civilian staff, officers, even janitors seemed to pause for a moment, not because they recognized his face, but because they knew his story. An aide led him down a long corridor lined with portraits of generals and war heroes. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old history. At the end of the hall stood General Langford, hands clasped behind his back. "Sergeant," the general greeted, his voice steady. "Sir." Daniel snapped a perfect salute. "At ease," Langford said, motioning toward a seat. "You've had quite a week." Daniel hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Yes, sir." "Unexpectedly so." Langford studied him. "You didn't ask for attention. You didn't seek fame. You just stood your ground." Daniel lowered his eyes. "Sir, I only did what I swore to do." "That's exactly what makes it extraordinary," Langford said quietly. He leaned forward. "Do you have any idea what that moment meant to people? Veterans across the world saw in you something they feared the world had forgotten in wavering honor." Daniel stayed silent, unsure how to process it. Fame wasn't what he wanted, but hearing that it meant something that mattered. Langford continued. "The Secretary of Defense saw the footage. The President, too." Daniel's head snapped up. "The President, sir." The general nodded. "He asked me what punishment should be given to the officer. I told him punishment isn't the answer. Understanding is. That officer will undergo full retraining on ceremonial conduct." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's fair, sir." Langford smiled faintly. "I thought you'd say that." He stood and walked toward the window, looking out over the city. "Sergeant, we fight wars abroad, but sometimes we forget the battles we must fight here, battles of respect, patience, and memory." He turned back to Daniel. "You reminded this nation that discipline isn't silenced, it's devotion." Then he reached into a folder and took out a small black box. Opening it, he revealed a silver medal gleaming softly under the fluorescent lights. "This is the soldier's medal," he said. "It's awarded for heroism not involving actual conflict, and for what you endured to protect the dignity of the fallen. It's yours." Daniel's throat tightened. He rose to attention, emotion burning behind his calm exterior. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Langford stepped closer, pinning the medal to his chest. "You already said it. Sunwin, you didn't move." There was silence again, soft, meaningful, the kind that didn't need words. Outside, the flag atop the Pentagon fluttered in the wind, full and proud. And beneath it, a single soldier stood. No longer anonymous yet, still humble, still faithful, still guarding something greater than himself. That night, back in his small quarters near Arlington, Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole placed the metal box gently on his nightstand. He didn't touch it again. It gleamed softly under the lamplight, quiet, dignified, UNDESIRED. He sat at his desk, opened a blank notebook, and began to write a letter. His handwriting was slow and deliberate, each word carved with the same care he gave to every measured step before the tomb. "To my father," he began, "I never thought the world would notice a man standing still." He paused, the pen hovering. The memory of his father's voice echoed in his head. "Respect is not given, Danny, it's guarded." Daniel smiled faintly. "You were right, Dad," he whispered aloud. "Even when they misunderstand you, stand anyway." He continued the letter. "Today, I received a medal, but it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you and to all the names we'll never know, carved into marble and memory. I only did what you taught me, to stand when others would fall, to guard when no one is watching." He took a deep breath, the air heavy with meaning. "If honor means anything, it's this. Not the applause, not the headlines, not even the medal. It's standing for what's right quietly, firmly, without expecting anything in return." Daniel set the pen down. Outside his window, the cemetery stretched out under the moonlight, rows upon rows of white stones, each one a story, a heartbeat, a sacrifice. He rose, opened the window, and looked toward the tomb of the unknown soldier. The moonlight reflected off the marble like a silent flame. He whispered softly, "Good night, Dad, I'm still on watch." And somewhere in the distance, a lone bugle began to play taps. The haunting notes drifted through the night, slow, eternal. Daniel stood at attention by the open window, saluting into the darkness, tears sliding silently down his face. For him, this wasn't the end of a story, it was the continuation of a promise. Morning broke over Arlington with a golden calm. The mist had lifted. The sky was clear and gentle. Visitors began to gather earlier than usual, drawn by something they couldn't quite explain, a sense that this day mattered. When Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole arrived at his post, he noticed something different. Flowers had been placed along the walkway leading to the tomb. Some bore messages written in children's handwriting. Others came from veterans groups across the country. One note read, "Because of you, my son wants to stand guard too." Another simply said, "Honor lives." Daniel took his ceremonial position in silence, performing each step, each turn, with the same precision as always. But today, something within him had shifted. He wasn't just guarding the unknown. He was guarding the faith people had placed in him, the belief that integrity still existed. In the distance, General Langford arrived again quietly, this time, without entourage or fanfare. He stood among the visitors, hat in hand, watching Daniel's movements with a faint, proud smile. Beside him stood the same police officer, the one who had fired the taser. He wore his dress blues, face somber. Langford had arranged it. The officer had requested to come. When the ceremony ended, Daniel marched off his post with crisp dignity. As he approached the path, the officer stepped forward. "Sergeant Cole," he said quietly. Daniel stopped, turning to face him. The air between them was heavy not with anger, but with something deeper. The officer swallowed hard. "I came to say, I was wrong. I didn't understand what you stood for. I disrespected something sacred. I'm sorry." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel gave a small nod. "We all forget. Sometimes, what matters is that we remember." The officer extended his hand. Daniel looked at it, then took it firmly. No words were needed after that. General Langford approached, his tone warm. "Gentlemen," he said softly, "what you've done here both of you means more than you realize. This isn't just about one mistake or one act of courage. It's about what this place stands for. Forgiveness, resolve, unity." The officer stepped back, visibly relieved. Daniel simply nodded, eyes steady. As the general turned to leave, a reporter standing at a respectful distance asked, "General, what should people take away from this story?" Langford paused. Then, with a faint smile, he said, "That silence can be louder than any command. That sometimes, the bravest thing a man can do is stand still." The cameras clicked, but Daniel didn't look their way. He walked back toward the tomb, resuming his watch, as sunlight caught the metal pin to his chest. It gleamed not as a decoration, but as a reminder. And somewhere above, an eagle circled high over the marble rose, the wind carrying the quiet promise of a soldier's eternal duty. Weeks passed. The world moved on, as it always does, but something quiet lingered in the heart of the nation. The video that once sparked outrage had transformed into something timeless, something sacred. Schools began showing it during Veterans Week. Churches spoke of it in sermons about courage. Even soldiers stationed overseas wrote home about the guard who never moved. And through it all, Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole continued his duty. Day after day, step after step, rain or shine. He didn't seek attention. He didn't speak to the media. He simply stood, because that was what he was meant to do. One chilly November morning, a small ceremony took place at the tomb of the unknown soldier. The president himself attended, along with generals, soldiers, families, and civilians. The crowd stretched far beyond the gates. When Daniel stepped out to take his position, the entire gathering fell silent. Not the forced silence of respect, but something deeper, like the hush before a prayer. He marched with flawless precision, rifle against his shoulder, eyes forward. Every movement echoed through the marble courtyard, sharp and steady. As he completed his turn, his gaze briefly caught the reflection of the flag rippling in the wind. The same flag that draped his father's coffin, the same flag that covered countless others who rested here. A warmth filled his chest, not pride, but peace. From the front row, General Langford watched with a faint smile. Beside him, the once disgraced police officer stood tall in uniform, now serving as an honor guard liaison, a new purpose found through humility. When the ceremony concluded, the president stepped forward and laid a wreath at the tomb. He paused beside Daniel and whispered, "Thank you for reminding this nation what honor looks like." Daniel didn't respond. He didn't have to. The silence was his answer. The bugler began to play taps. The notes drifted upward, mingling with the cold wind. Every eye glistened. Every heart felt smaller, quieter, humbled. And as the final note faded into the air, Daniel Cole resumed his post. No applause followed. No cameras clicked. Only the steady rhythm of boots on marble, the sound of devotion beyond words. He would guard the unknown as long as he was able, and when his time ended, another would take his place. Because some duties never end. Some vows never die. And as the flag waved softly above, bathed in golden light, it seemed to whisper what every fallen soul already knew. He kept his watch. ***, I really appreciate you watching all the way through. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile for a moment, let me know in the comments. I read them all, and they honestly keep me going more than you can imagine.